again for joining us for this really amazing talk with Dr. Sarabeth Berk on the power of hybrid professionals. This talk is brought to you by the RISD Alumni Club of LA. Most big cities, just so everybody knows, have really amazing alumni clubs, and we host really fun events, and it's a great way to meet new people and create really amazing connections with other creatives and professionals, and sometimes just talk about the good and the bad of or not the bad, but the really crazy times at RISD that we all have and we can all talk about. So it's a really fun time. Check it out. And yeah, hopefully, there are events going on even through COVID times that are virtual and or outside. So take a look, see if there's a club around your area, and hopefully we can all stay engaged and connected. So I see people are kind of streaming in, so maybe we'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll have Dr. Berk talk about this really amazing topic. So maybe I'll go ahead and introduce her now, and we are very, very excited to welcome Dr. Sarabeth Berk, who is the leading expert in hybrid professional identity and a hybrid professional herself. She calls herself a creative disruptor because she blends her artist, researcher, educator, designer identities together. She was featured in Forbes and is a TEDx speaker, author, recipient of the Colorado Inno on Fire Award for her innovative work. So thank you so much and welcome, Dr. Sarabeth Berk.
Thank you, Cristina. Oh my gosh, I've been looking forward to this so much because being back with the RISD community is, my peeps, and you guys will understand some of my research in ways that I don't share it with other audiences because there's a lot of creativity embedded, and I think that's what makes it unique and also why I'm excited to share it with all of you. And thank you to RISD for hosting me. I'm just really thrilled to be here. Should we kick it off? Are we ready? Okay, so I am going to bring up my slides.
And before we go in, I wanted to say, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and use the Q&A function. And towards the end of the talk, we're going to spend a little bit of time with Dr. Berk and have her answer some of your questions. So
thank you. And I'm available to be interrupted if people want to ask things during the presentation, but we'll have time at the end too. So what I'm talking about today is this notion of professional identity and hybrid professionals specifically. And it's about who are you at the intersection of your multiple talents or identities. I think a lot of us in the RISD community resonate with that, and I'll dive in more. The way that I'm going to structure the talk, just to give you that overview, little background on me, then I'll tell you about hybridity and the current state, what's happening in the workforce, and what's happening with hybrid work and hybrid workers. I'll give you some examples so you can see this in context, but then I have a whole process I've developed on how to help people see their hybridity. So I'll give you some of my tips and then time for Q&A. And what I want you to walk away from today are a few things. First is really understanding the difference of hybrid professionals versus experts and generalists, because that's usually what we hear about so often in work. You'll see why hybrid professionals are critical to the workforce and what to consider when hiring or managing them, because I think there's a couple of details there. So when you're applying to new jobs or you're working with hybrids, you can see some of the ways they need to be managed. Obviously, I'm going to reveal a few of my tools to help you see your hybridity and explore your intersections, and then tips to rethink a better title for yourself to convey your unique value, because finding your hybrid identity in your work really is about showing what makes you you and why you're so unique at what you do. And this is different than how people usually talk about personal branding and finding your secret sauce. So to begin with, I'll start with me. The cornerstone of this research that I embarked on is about that question we've all heard so often: what do you do? And when I got that question, I honestly became stumped over time. Initially, I answered with my job title. I said, well, I'm a director of blank. I was a program director quite often. But that wasn't really who I was. I was more than my job title. How was I supposed to show people that? Because this is how I felt. this is me from different work experiences I've had. I've been a teacher, an artist, a graphic facilitator. I've led design challenges. I've been a teacher in the classroom. And I went to RISD to get my degree in art and design education. So I graduated in 2006 from the MAT program. And it was right around that time that I was just starting to find my professional identity and show up in the world and say, I'm Sarabeth, I'm an art educator. But over time, there were all these other parts of myself that started to show up as well, right? I was the artist and this designer and creating websites. And then I got into research and suddenly I was like, wow, how do I describe all the things I do? That became a pain point. This struggle of wearing so many hats was an issue because I didn't know how to move that forward in my career path to break out of the box of just being seen as an art educator. So that was where this work started for me. What I noticed over time is actually I work at the intersections. I'm not just a list of different identities, the artist, the teacher, the researcher. I'm actually combining them. They were influencing each other. I didn't have language on how to talk about that. So essentially what happened, and I'll show this more towards the end when I give you tools, is I went from calling myself a director of programs to learning what are the core identities that make me me in my work specifically, because in life we have a lot of identities. I realized the artist, designer, educator, and researcher were really my core. And when I looked at the intersections, that's how I surfaced and found this new title for myself, which today I use as creative disruptor. And I'll explain that journey a little bit more later. So as I mentioned, when I do my introductions, I say, today I'm Sarabeth, I'm a creative disruptor because I'm a hybrid professional and I work at the intersections of being this artist, researcher, educator, designer. That's a little bit of a new way I've found that is a very effective introduction because it changes the normal script. Even just using the word hybrid is a very effective tool to open up a new dialogue with clients or your network. I'm going to give a little background on how my research methodology worked. And this is the part I don't usually share with people because it's kind of a little nerdy, but it's also very artistic. So I think you'll appreciate this. In my research, I was doing this during my doctoral studies. I was working on my PhD because, as I mentioned, I wanted to break out of the box of being a teacher. And I thought a PhD was the way to do that, that a credential would help. So I learned how to really study things. And the topic I focused on was professional identity, since that's what I was wrestling with. And I found this methodology that just blew my mind because I didn't know it even existed. It's called artography. So what makes artography so interesting is it's a combination of things and really emphasizes that you work in between spaces. So art is one part and then graphy is the other. So right away, this methodology represents using creative and visual disciplines alongside writing to make meaning and make sense. So I was drawn to this methodology right from that. But in addition, ART is kind of an acronym for artist, researcher, teacher. And sometimes artography, those words are changed out to artist, researcher, curator, or other identities that fit you. But essentially what it's saying is, as the practitioner, researcher, I'm combining my own identities of artist, researcher, educator, and working between them. And that is helping me investigate this, in addition to looking at visual and written forms of research. So it's a very strange methodology because it allows you to be moving in inquiry between different identities and spaces. Then I had another breakthrough moment. When I'd collected all this data, I'd interviewed a number of people. I was studying their professional identity to understand, well, how do they have many identities beyond what their job title is about? And Rene Magritte and Surrealist artists really influenced me. I saw this painting, and it's a pretty famous one. You've probably seen it too. And it's a painting of a pipe. And below it in French, it says, "This is not a pipe." And what Magritte is doing is saying that this is a representation of the thing it is, but it's not the thing itself. And that was an aha for me, that all of us are using job titles, which is a representation of us, but it's not who we really are. So that helped me see that insight that words are arbitrary points of meaning. This painting by Magritte shows one of my other key findings, which is paradoxes and juxtaposition. The notion that in this painting, you can have day and night represented at the same time. But we know that's not possible. It can't be night and day simultaneously. That's how we are when we're in our hybrid identity. We are two things that don't belong together, represented simultaneously. So it's possible. And then the last painting that I used from Magritte is this one, and I talk about it in my TED Talk. I found this image of a fish human, and I was like, what the heck is that? I'm like, I've never seen this before. And when you usually combine it, you see a mermaid, but the bottom half is the fish and the top is the human. That's not what this is. That was a light bulb moment for me, because as an artist, educator, researcher, designer, all of these parts are me, which means I'm a whole new type of professional. I don't even know what to call myself, just like we don't have a name for a fish creature like this. And that is hybridity. Hybridity is that fusion of two existing things into something new. So all of that has led me to today, where I've become this leading expert on hybrid professionals and hybrid professional identity. And what I'm doing is working at the spaces of personal branding, career development, and identity research. I'm creating a whole new category and language that borrows from those disciplines to help people see there's a category of professional and it's hybridity, and this is how it all works together. So I wrote a book called More Than My Title, and it is The Power of Hybrid Professionals in a Workforce of Experts and Generalists is the subtitle. And if you want to grab a copy, I talk more about intersections and case studies and people that are hybrids and what all of this background framework even means. And please use this code if you would like to get a discount, RISD LA. And I think they're going to put the link in the chat as well. In addition to the book, there is a companion workbook. And that's because the workbook goes into the journey of, well, how do you figure out your hybridity? And the book really just talks about the bigger concepts and how this works in the workforce. So I'll be sharing a couple of those tools and giving you some handouts too. So stay to the end. So I want to talk about what shapes a career. Typically, if you go to a career advisor, they're going to say a couple things to you. You've probably heard this before. What's your passion and what's your purpose? When you find the intersection of those things, that's what you should do in the world, or that's how you should make money, right? And I think that's really good. We need to know passion and purpose to find, where we're suited, except it's missing a key ingredient. So the new way I like to think about work is this. It's as a three-legged stool. That work is sitting on top of your passion, what you love to do, your purpose, why you do what you do, but also your identity, which is who are you, or what do you call yourself when you are following your passion and purpose? If we don't know our identity, then we can't really explain who we are in the workforce or what kinds of jobs people might need us for. And describing our identity is a really important part of our career. So let me talk more about identity for a second. Identity is a really big spectrum, and it involves race and class, gender, ability, our social interests, our personal interests. And professional identity is just one aspect within a whole range. So I want to acknowledge that because my research is just on the dimension of profession. And when I move forward in the presentation, and you start to reflect on your own professional identities, it's really easy to start to creep out of that, to think about your hobbies and your other interests. Now, I don't want you to ignore them, but in terms of professional identity, it's really what you put on your resume. So anything you want to be paid for or known for in your work, that's the space that we're playing with today, because so many other identities exist within us. Professional identity, my definition, is anything you do that you consider to be your work, whether or not you get paid, and it's what you call yourself. As I mentioned, things on your resume, not your hobbies and other interests. So here's my key framework of professional identity that I think really hasn't been revealed in the workforce. And this is what I found so enlightening in my research. There are three kinds of professionals that you can fall into. The first one is this bucket of singularity. That's what we usually label as experts and specialists. Multiplicity is the next type of professional identity. That's where you have many identities, not just one. There are a ton of different labels for this group. Job crafters, freelancers, gig workers, multi-talented, really anything with the word multi fits into this one. Polymaths, Renaissance souls, you get the point. You've probably used terms like I'm a jack of all trades, I wear a lot of hats. That all falls into multiplicity, which is just many. But what if you're not just many identities? What if your identities connect and combine? What are you then? That's hybridity. Hybridity is where these circles start to blend. So a hybrid professional is someone who's integrating different professional identities together and works at the intersection. I know I've said this word again and again, but integration is really the key word I want you to take away, instead of just separation or having many identities. The analogy I use the most is when you're cooking, you take a lot of ingredients to make something like a pizza, the basil, the pepperoni, the olives, the mushrooms, and you combine them. And when you do, you eat it as this delicious, multi-flavored type of pizza. That is us as hybrid professionals. We are combinations of really special ingredients, and we don't just call ourselves pizzas, or we don't just call ourselves a bunch of different ingredients. You actually create a special name for that special type of pizza, like the, ensalada machada pizza or something silly. Obviously, that one is not what you would call yourself, but pizza is just a representation of like thinking about your hybridity. And the relationship between these ingredients or between the different parts is where you have to drill in. The relationships is what makes you make sense when you have all these different parts. And essentially, I get this a lot that people, what's the difference here? Well, a Swiss Army knife is made up of a lot of parts, right? Is that a hybrid? It's not, because you use one part at a time. The hybrid idea is the fusion, the interconnection where you're inseparable. More like a Camelback is a hybrid product. And when hybrid things are made, we don't have names for them at first. We probably used to call this a water bottle pack, but now we're used to the term Camelback and we know what people mean. So it takes a little bit to evolve into your hybridity. So here's what's going on in the current state of the workforce. I want to address a few points to bring us up to speed. The average worker today is holding more than 10 jobs in a lifetime across 3 to 4 different careers. So they're reinventing themselves. When people are changing jobs or changing careers and they think, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm in a transition. That's happening more normal than not. And I just saw this stat the other day. 25% of workers right now have changed industries, not just jobs, since the onset of the pandemic. So we have a lot of workers moving between disciplines and fields and industries, which means their identities and talents are being readapted into whole new places. And that's really important to think about. Also, this notion that people say they wear a lot of hats or they do a lot of things and they don't know how to describe themselves. If you're multitasking, you've probably felt like this before, and workers just don't know how to describe what they do. And then the last piece is this. Everything suddenly has gone hybrid in the last year. We've heard about hybrid work from home models, hybrid events, hybrid learning, hybrid work. So this notion of hybridity suddenly is on the top of people's minds. And that's why I think the topic today is so important, because we haven't been talking about people. What happens when this is you becoming the hybrid? So hybrid work, which I think is a term we've all heard of because it's everywhere in the media, I want to reframe that to really break down what do we mean when we hear hybrid work? Because right now it's a catch-all. I want you to think about it more as the hybrid workforce. And in terms of that, there are 3 things happening: hybrid workplaces, hybrid jobs and roles, and hybrid workers or professionals. Now, I'm going to skip the hybrid workplaces part because that one's the easiest, right? It's where you have remote work and physical work and some variation. but we're going to go into the roles and the people. So hybrid work roles or jobs, I'll use any of those interchangeably, is the reinvention of existing roles, forging the creation of new ones. That's a definition from Burning Glass that did a report in 2019. And hybrid worker jobs means things like this. 57% of engineering positions now require business and leadership skills. More than half of all IT jobs now require some form of digital design. And marketing managers who know SQL make 41% more money than those who don't. So people who traditionally used to be more in that singularity or expert, like I'm just an engineer, suddenly needs to get a whole new skill set to work between them. Qualities of hybrid jobs typically mean things that are opposite or can even have contradictions. So humans working with computers, being technical and non-technical, being cross-disciplinary, cross-departmental, internal, external. Those are signs of hybrid jobs. Here's just a few examples of job descriptions I've actually seen posted where in some cases the word hybrid is showing up in the job description. This is for a cruise director looking for someone on board and ashore. This is one of my favorite examples from Jump. They are like a design agency, innovation strategy company looking for an innovation strategist. And right at the top of the job description, they said, "Are you a hybrid thinker?" And then look at how they define that. They want someone who's one part humanist, one part technologist, one part capitalist, an MBA designer with a degree in anthropology. Now, most of us would say, well, does that even exist? That's a unicorn, right? Those are the terms we hear in HR. But the truth is these people exist. You're probably on the webinar with me right now. You have these different parts of yourself. So we need to start realizing, yes, these people exist and they are hybrids. How do we talk about that? And then the last one is this role for a site reliability engineer. This is very technical, but this person is working on a DevOps team right away. DevOps, a hybrid word, and they're going to have a cross-functional kind of dual reporting structure because they're working across teams. These are all symptoms and signals of hybrid work. Again, from the Burning Glass report, why do we need to focus on hybrid jobs? Well, because they are less vulnerable to automation compared to other jobs, and they get paid more. So highly hybridized jobs are very rare, and they're looking for just a small portion of the talent pool that has this talent. Burning Glass said that in their projection is hybrid jobs will grow by 21% over the next decade and get paid 20 to 40% more because it's a unique combination of things they need from a person that is unique. So it's really hard to find this kind of talent. Highly hybridized jobs are things like this: bioinformatician, financial quantitative analyst, a data science, a cybersecurity analyst, a health information manager. These are roles that didn't exist in the past. They're combinations of things, and they really are bringing opposites together in new ways. Here's a great example of highly hybridized work. You know, a surgeon used to be an expert, had to know how to do this certain type of surgery. But today that's not enough. They actually need to work with AI and robotics to learn how to use that kind of machinery to do even more specialized types of surgery. So you can see how these really interesting combinations are forming. So let's move on to workers now. What about the people side? Well, any professional that is combining different work identities together, A plus B plus C, is creating a new type of identity. It's undefined, back to that integration of their identities together. So let me give some examples. Hybrid workers, they tend to use language like this if they're describing themselves, like I'm a connector, or I'm this bridge builder, I'm such a chameleon or translator, I'm a jack of all trades, because they don't know how to express their hybridity. These are key words I've heard from many hybrids trying to express themselves. Maybe you've heard of Chip Wilson. He is the founder of Lululemon. But what is Chip's hybrid professional identity? Well, let's look at it. If we draw a Venn diagram for Chip, his background before he founded Lululemon, he worked in retail, so he knew that sector already. He was also in the sports industry, so he understood, I think he was doing snow sports and like skateboarding. and he understood fabric. So at the intersection of those things, he actually started to perceive a new market opportunity, that what if people had beautiful apparel they could wear on the streets and for workouts, and that became athleisure. So Chip's own hybridity, his own expertise, combining in a new way, helped him see something other people didn't see. And then he created a whole new category of retail apparel. And athleisure is a huge multi-billion-dollar part of the fashion industry. That's where hybridity can take us, is into new products and solutions. There are many celebrities out there that are hybrids, Michelle Obama being one. These are people that defy job titles because they do so many things. So hybrids are already among us. We just haven't called them out yet. I don't even know what a good job title would be for Michelle Obama, because she's a philanthropist, former first lady, lawyer, activist. The list is very long. But there are people like you and I that are on LinkedIn, that are doing work every day, and we are hybrids too. Here's a snapshot from LinkedIn of just headers. And when you see headers, I do this, so many of us do this. People are using interesting grammar to demonstrate they have many identities. So you'll see commas and slashes and plus signs and dashes, because how the heck do we express that multiplicity, right? But the hybrid is different. The hybrid is where you represent, well, who am I when I combine those identities? So if you look at some of these, like Brittany and Jennifer and Marsha, they actually have hybrid titles. Brittany's the chief fire starter and Jennifer's the people operations extraordinaire. And that sort of sets them apart and makes you wonder, well, what does that mean? Why did they call themselves that? What is that title? So you can have a hybrid title or not. It's sort of up to you. And even if you work for yourself and you're freelancing or you own your own company, you can use a hybrid title. And I've seen people within organizations and companies also create one. If you do have a formal job title, like I used to be director of programs, I would start with that introduction and then add my hybrid title after. I'd be like, I'm Sarabeth, director of programs, but I actually call myself a hybrid. I'm this creative disruptor because blank. That became more of a hook for people talking with me than just saying I was the director of programs. So in these two examples with Nick and Brittany, you can see I started with their hybrid title to show you. Nick calls himself a plantrepreneur. That's a hybrid word, obviously. And it means that he's a plant coach who's passionate about all things green. And that's built on these 4 identities of him being a technologist, a plant lover, an influencer, and an advisor. So when you build and blend those together, you come up with plantpreneur, that's his name, and then he defines it. With Brittany, she's the chief fire starter at Fireside. Essentially, she's the CEO, but she's not saying that. And she's helping communities and neighbors and small business owners with low-cost marketing solutions. Her background is being a director of accounts, marketer, and sports administrator. And so that's how she saw she's really a fire starter. That's a better term for her. Other people don't necessarily have hybrid titles and are still hybrids. So Sarah is a financial advisor, but you can see how her background's in financial planning, yoga, life coaching, and being an LGBTQ advocate. When she combines them, she's helping humans with big dreams. So the definition, it goes back to that quote I had earlier about the relationship between the identities, is where you make sense of your hybridity. That's why I have these equal signs, like what does the hybrid title equal? And Amy, again, pretty standard title, Director of Leadership Development, but she's this hostess, marketing strategist, psychology, safety expert, and entrepreneur. One tool I recommend for hybrids, if you know your primary identities, which I've listed here in the bullets, at a very minimum, you should just say, I work at the intersection of being a financial planner, a yoga instructor, a life coach, and an LGBTQ advocate. Just even saying the word, I work at the intersection, helps people understand, well, why does she have 4 identities? And then the definition becomes really important to lock that in and make sense. The last thing I want to land on with this section is hybridity, not individualism, is America's competitive advantage. So this was an article in Forbes just in December, And it really struck me because this Aspen Institute is who contributed this article, and they focus on some identity research in one of their think tanks. And they were calling this out. They were like, wow, we really need to talk more about hybridity because it's that critical. And I think that translates to the rest of the workforce too. Hybrid workers have a certain place alongside experts and alongside generalists. It's not that they're better, and certainly not everyone is a hybrid, but it's another category. And it takes us out of the binary of just thinking you're either or. No, you can be many identities simultaneously. We just didn't know how to talk about this. That's why I'm so excited to share this with you. So now let me go a little bit into the process. This is from the workbook I mentioned, Find Your Hybrid Professional Identity. And what you're doing in this process, what I lead you through, is how to turn your hybridity into your unique differentiator and value prop in the workforce. And it also builds your confidence and helps you attract the right opportunities, because oftentimes hybrids are going after certain jobs. Well, that job's never going to understand them. They're kind of fighting an uphill battle. If you're a hybrid, you need to be able to talk about this and communicate it. And then also people will see that, and then you'll find the right opportunities for you. So in the book, in the main book, the More Than My Title book, I talk about a spectrum of development. And that's kind of what I'm leading people through is at first you don't even know really what your professional identity is. People don't know how to talk about that clearly. And then you start to sense, well, maybe I am a hybrid, or maybe I haven't thought about my intersections. So there's an emerging side of this. And then you move into more established, where you're confident about your identities, you know how they connect, you know your intersections, and it becomes very fluid and effortless. And the journey of the stages that I have in my book start with where you are in your current state, this old identity. And then this is actually an emotional line that I drew. Things get interesting when you break apart and figure out your professional identities that are your core, but things get really hard when you start to look at your intersections. So just know up front, there's some challenging self-reflection you have to do. The intersections are like really easy to see on paper, but when you wonder what you're doing in them, your head starts to explode. It's a really big thought exercise. And then I've got the iterative loop, because it takes a few different tries. It can be weeks or months to find the right hybrid title and way to do your elevator pitch until you're truly confident about it. So here's what the steps of the journey look like. As I mentioned, first it's starting with where you are. What do you call yourself right now? What do other people call you to? Just kind of baselining and seeing how you see yourself. Then we drill down, we go into your professional identities, and we're going to do that actually in a moment. When you sort through your identities, then we start to make a Venn diagram to investigate the intersections. That's where things get tricky. And eventually you come out the other side, and I call it hybridizing, and then you have to own it. That's essentially the journey. So I want to give you some food for thought over the next few minutes. You can kind of do this on some scrap paper, or I've got a handout you can look at. But what are your professional identities? That is my first question to you. When I sit down and have coffee with people and say, well, tell me about yourself, what do you do? They just start listing a bunch of different things. So that's what I want you to notice. And I want to give you permission to brainstorm that. So use this QR code and you can get a handout. That's my professional identity word list. I think Christina's going to put a link in the chat to help you out as well. And if you don't want to get the handout, you can kind of see an example. I've listed a lot of identity words. And the reason I've done that is to jumpstart your thinking, because we get stuck in our own boxes. If you just started brainstorming on your own, I think you might get 5 or 10. So I'm giving you a lot of possibilities. So when you look at this handout, what you start with is reflecting on, what do you really do in your work? Okay, you make art, you do marketing, maybe you create websites, whatever those key skills are that you're doing, right? Actions or verbs. But are the things you do your identities? So sometimes if you do programming or sales, do you also call yourself a salesperson or a programmer? Or what I find with a lot of people is they're like, well, I do those things, but actually I'm a visionary or I'm a storyteller. There's an identity that sits up here and the actions are just beneath that. So consider, as you're reflecting on your professional identity list, brainstorm all the things you do and then ask yourself, what are the identities when I'm doing that? And so you'll go through the identity word list and just circle as many as you like. Things like, are you a connector and a giver and a lecturer and a partner and a peacemaker? Have fun with this. Come up with other words too. And where you're going with this is here. You're going to brainstorm as many as identities, professional identities. Let me just make that caveat, just your professional identities, all the ones that you have. And then when you've got maybe a list of 20, you're going to narrow them down. What you're trying to get to is 2, 3, or 4 at the max. I'll explain why in a second. And these 2, 3, or 4 identities need to be your primary ones. The criteria of a primary professional identity is you use it daily. Like it shows up very, very frequently in you because you love it so much. It's an identity you just have to be using frequently. It should be one of your areas of best expertise, something that you want the world to know you for. And this is like a must-have identity. If you had a job that said, sorry, but we don't need you to be a designer. We're hiring you because you're so good at your sales part of what you do, you would feel crushed, like leaving your designer identity to the side. You would never feel complete without that. So that's how critical your primary professional identities are. Now, all the other identities on the list that you brainstorm are important, but they just don't show up as often. They're not that foundation. I call them secondary or non-primary identities. So you can still reference them. They're still part of you, but they're not the core. Because where we're going with this is here. This goes back to that 2, 3, or 4. You're going to draw a Venn diagram. Now, to be a hybrid, you have to at least have 2 because 2 circles makes 1 intersection. That's 1 space. But if you have 3 identities, you get 4 intersections you can play with. And 4 primary professional identities, that gives you 9 intersections, which is really crazy. So 4 is the upper limit because if you have more than that, it's just so much complexity. You don't really know your true intersections. I think 3 is the sweet spot. I encourage people to really get to their top 3. So draw a Venn diagram and play with this and put your different identity words in there. Because the next question to answer is this one. Who are you at the intersection of your primary professional identities? That's a very big question, and I don't think many of us have ever thought about this before. So my Venn diagram might look like this, right? I got really solid on my primary identities of artist, educator, and researcher. But who am I at that intersection? Well, actually, I've got a few tricks that I help people navigate this. Essentially, there's stories that you need to come up with from your memory. You have to think about like where you do things that only you do. We look for themes, we look for patterns, we look for keywords that are emerging. So this is where dialogue and some coaching and guidance really helps, because this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to let go of your old labels to really soak in the combination spaces. One trick I'll give you too is you want to go to emotions and feelings. Like when you feel your best in your work, that's actually where your hybridity is being activated, and it's usually unconscious. It can also be part of that flow state if you're familiar with flow or zone of genius. An example from my own experience, I was running meetings at an organization, and I wasn't, paying attention. I was like, this is how I run a meeting. But in that meeting, I suddenly had people doing role plays to be the user we were talking about instead of just thinking about it. And then I was like drawing all these pictures. And so the meeting started to show me as the teacher in that moment, and the researcher and the designer. All of those identities were actively happening during that meeting, and I didn't see it. And it was one of the best meetings because we made a lot of progress. We saw ways to reshape the program that nobody was thinking of before. And it like things clicked. And so some of the words I used before, being that connector, that bridge builder, chameleon, I was in that space. I was like, I'm just in my flow. But when I can freeze frame and think about things I'm doing in my work and how I'm doing them differently, I can start to unpack, oh my gosh, I didn't know I was doing this thing. I took it for granted. And that's where I started to see that I challenge things, I test assumptions, I'm very creative. And eventually those themes helped me see the creative disruptor. That's how I got to my hybrid title. And that's what I do with other people, is really push and push and push and push to get very specific in what they're doing, because specificity helps you understand, like, you're not just a designer. It's like, what type of designer? I wasn't just running a meeting. Like, how was I running that meeting? What kinds of tools was I doing? And getting those details helps you start to really pop out who you are in the intersections. So the last question I get often is, oh my gosh, like, how do I introduce myself as a hybrid? How do I bring this into the world? Because these tools are helping me see myself, but how do I apply it and communicate it? So take a snapshot of this so you can get the elevator pitch. It's a 3-part pitch, and it literally takes 10 seconds to say. The top part is about declaring your hybridity. Hi, I'm Sarabeth. I'm a hybrid professional. I call myself a creative disruptor. Boom. I just framed myself in one sentence. And I planted the seed of hybridity, and I planted this new hybrid title that usually intrigues people, like opens the door. Now you anticipate people are going to say, well, what does that mean? So then the next part is list the parts of your hybridity. So I work at the intersection being this artist, educator, designer, researcher. And that means that I'm able to create innovation strategies that radically connect people and resources in new ways. Literally, that was 2 or 3 sentences. I talked about being a hybrid, my hybrid title, my different primary identities, and then why that matters, what the relationship is when those things mix together. That is something I've used in cover letters, in email intros, in professional networking. It's really a tool that's helped me be more fluid and clear in describing myself. And it usually translates into longer conversations, which honestly is the point. You want people to get curious about you and say, oh my gosh, I've never met a designer, blah, 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 blah. Maybe I need that. Like, how does that work? What do you do? So it keeps the conversation going longer. So that's where I wanted to take you today. There's so much more I could unpack on the journey or the background of hybrids or hiring them and managing them, any of that. So I would love to open it up to questions. And just as a reminder, if you're curious, please grab a copy of the book and use the code RISD LA. So I'm going to stop there, Cristina, and open it back up to Q&A time.
Okay. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and send them through the Q&A function. While we do that, I actually had a question for you as you were talking. So I know we have some students on the call as well. So for the younger generation, how do you think this applies to them? Because you spoke a lot about just moving through the professional fields, but as younger kids, how would they apply that to their own experience?
Yeah. Honestly, I think this is my next book because I've been working more with college students and even some high school students. You think about it like a pre-professional identity. So even as a student, what are all the different things you're doing? You have a major, a minor, student clubs, you've got maybe a side job. What are all those different identities? What do you call yourself in the student club versus the major you're working on? Get clear on those different identities. Let go of the student identity. And then draw your own Venn diagram. So I've worked with a student, she was like a sociology major and head of the environmental club and loved social impact and a few other things. So we drew the Venn diagram, and she was a sociologist and like social justice advocate and something else. And she came up with a hybrid title of a passionate peacemaker. And she started using that in networking when she was getting her first job out of college, or just getting more comfortable talking to people about, well, okay, great, you're a sociology major, so what? But by adding the tagline of, well, I see myself as this passionate peacemaker, which means I'm curious about this and this in the world, and I want to take more action on that. She said it changed the way people talk to her. It helped her get some volunteer and internship work, and it just made her feel more confident. So this totally works for people that don't have a career path yet, because it's about identity. It's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have a few questions coming in. Claudia had a question. She said, I understand the hybrid and put together my pitch already, though my side gig is making textiles. I'll be in Martha Stewart's Living in the May issue. Congrats. How do I navigate those two quote unquote careers in my pitch?
Okay, did she say what the two careers were? Sorry, I missed that part.
No, I think, Claudia, do you want to, she says she's 54, but she was, no, I don't think she mentioned her first career. Oh, graphic design and textiles. There we go.
So, I mean, that's the question that you have to answer, right? Like, how do graphic design and textiles fit together? What's happening in that intersection for you? How are you being inspired, or what skills are carrying over from the textiles into the graphic design and vice versa? Are you able to see patterns and colors in new ways? Do you use that to do client onboarding or develop, vision boards or something? You've really got to do a lot of self-reflection. I probably missed saying this, but looking at your intersections takes a lot of time. Like when I work with people, we meet once a week over a few weeks because you need that much reflection and processing time to think of stories, to think of concrete examples of the work you do, and then sort of go deep into each of them. So I'd say start with the Venn diagram, but then start looking at I call them micro moments or like freeze frames of what you do in your work. It can't just be like, oh, I create websites. It's like, so does 10,000 other people. Look at how you are doing it and then keep questioning. Okay, notice all the details. So I've got other tools. Please feel free to message me through LinkedIn or Sarabeth at morethanmytitle.com. I can talk with you further.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question. When doing the professional identity worksheet, do I think about my dream position or my current position?
I love this. Yeah, I forgot to mention this. In the professional identity worksheet, it has who are you and who do you aspire to be? Because I meet people that are on that precipice or cusp. They're like, I kind of feel like I'm ready to move on in careers or change industries. So your aspirational identities, I think, are the dream job ones. Like, who are you trying to be or become more of? Maybe you want to be more of a storyteller. In your Venn diagram, one circle, just one, can include an aspirational identity so that you're taking who you currently are and adding in the flavor of what you're trying to be more of to see how that helps you think about positioning yourself differently. The other thing I would say, though, if you don't want to use the aspirational identity in your Venn diagram, when you actually do the exercise of digging into your intersections, you literally create a language word bank. There are all these new keywords about yourself that you weren't using or thinking of before. What that does is actually helps you search for better jobs online or seek out jobs that you're like, okay, I need a job that allows storytelling and visioning and playfulness and whatever. And you might find something you didn't even know, which might become a dream job. Essentially, let go of job titles because they are such misnomers. I was talking to this HR director and she's like, you can call someone an HR director, a chief of talent, a head of people, a this. They all mean the same thing. It's just different variations. So instead of searching for your dream job title, look at the qualities of your intersection that make you you, and then find jobs that represent those qualities. I think those are my two best suggestions for you.
Thank you. And then Rowan had a question. How can being a hybrid help when applying for traditional roles such as a photographer or retoucher?
Yeah, well, a couple of things right off the bat. Being a hybrid professional is about standing out. Your hybridity should be your selling point. And I tell people this, I'm going to add a second question there really fast. People say, if I'm a hybrid, what is my expertise? Well, your hybridity is your expertise. Me being a creative disruptor, that's my selling point. So there's that part. But not knowing what you're trying to do with this job, the photography and retouching job, hybrids can always go back to the singularity bucket. So you can untwine your different identities and just be one if you want to be one. You don't always have to be a hybrid. So if you're applying for a job that is singularity in my framework, then just show up as that. But if you're applying for a job where you want to be all your different pieces, then you want to start talking about your hybridity. And again, those stories of where your hybridity shows up and how you apply it really help during interviews too. Yeah.
And then Aaron, he missed the beginning of your talk. So I guess if you wouldn't mind, as we're waiting for more questions to come in, maybe going through your story just quickly again for him.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I told the full backstory, so it might be a good opportunity. You know, I realized I've gone through 4 professional identity crises, which when I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, how is that not something I was aware of? The first time I had a professional identity crisis without knowing that's what it was when I graduated from college as an undergrad. I just finished art school in Chicago. I didn't know who I was. I was like, I'm not a student anymore, but I don't have a job yet. So that was the first time I started to realize this issue of identity matters, but I don't know what to call it. And no one gave me that advice. People said, you're just burned out, maybe you're depressed, like just all these things. I eventually got on a career path, became an art educator, worked in some nonprofits. And then again, I hit my next stumbling block of just being a teacher and being seen as one thing, even though I was starting to make art on the side and had, items in Etsy and was doing some graphic design. And I was like, I have these different identities. Who am I now? And that was my next identity crisis. So it wasn't until I went into grad school to work on my PhD that this issue of what do you do was just haunting me, and it was causing me anxiety. And I studied it. Like, that's why I got into this. And through studying it, and then what you missed in the beginning, so watch the replay, is looking at art, specifically surrealist art by Rene Magritte. They do really interesting, strange things where they mess with reality and dreams. And that gave me the insights of, oh my gosh, hybridity exists in these paintings. Hybridity exists in my identity. I can be multiple things in a job. I don't know how to say it. Hybrid is the word I need. So that was a little bit of my story of how I ended up here. And once I finished the dissertation, I knew there was something more to this idea I needed to bring out into the world. It couldn't just live on the shelves of academia, but I also didn't trust that people cared. So it took me a few more years to do more research. I talked to people that were entrepreneurs, financial analysts, physical therapists, so many different industries to kind of test, does this work in other spaces? Sure enough, this concept of hybridity really resonates beyond just art and design and education. So that's a little of my backstory.
Robert had a very good question. How often should you revisit your hybridity and the Venn diagram process? I'm wondering if it would be a useful process for design students to go through each year.
Oh, I love this question. So identity research, if we hold from that space, shows that identity can be fixed. Some identities stay with us for a lifetime, and other identities are fluid, dynamic, and contextual. They'll change based on the moment or based on our time of life. So I think you can revisit your hybridity as often as needed. Maybe for some people, they need it again in 6 months. They're changing a lot, right? They're going through a growth spurt or a lot of job changes. Other people might be in a career for 10 years and feel really confident and secure, but then suddenly something else emerges and they're like, who am I now? I need to realign. So it's a tool I think that you can come back to. I don't think it would hurt to check annually just to do your own self-work. But yeah, it's a tool you can use whenever you need it.
And Erin wanted to also know, do you still go through cycles of burnout after discovering hybridity? If so, how do you move forward?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, as I said, my professional identity crises, my last one had to do with job loss. I was doing a project and the job ended, and I was like, I don't know who I am. Like, I was really connected with my identity from that last role. And so this idea, maybe it could be burnout in your case. Anytime we're going through a transition, it's a moment to say, well, who am I now and what am I doing? I think those two questions, we go back and forth, like, what's your why? What's your purpose? Well, how am I doing it? Well, then what do I call myself when I'm doing that thing? They all kind of echo each other. I think I lost the question, but did I answer it fully? Cristina, do you remember? Was it in the other? I can click back. And how do you move forward, I think was the question. I think first, it's really always getting clear of your foundation. What are your primary professional identities? My personal belief is when you find your hybrid title, like mine is Chief Creative Disruptor or just Creative Disruptor, that actually echoes, and I can see all the way back into my earlier jobs. I've been a creative disruptor this whole time. I just didn't know it. And I didn't understand my primary identities that were forming it. So that identity line is very authentic to me for many, many years. But if you want to move forward and if you're shifting, I think it's just go back to your basics. What are the core professional identities that you're using on a daily basis today? What's changed? And then how do they all fit together? That's the hybridity. Yeah, it's a process. Okay, what's the next one?
So Kim had a question. What if some of your identities are mainstream, such as designer, creative director, entrepreneur, and others are potentially polarizing, healer, energy, worker, intuitive?
Oh, another great question. I just wrote a blog post on this last week. It's this notion of personal blanding instead of personal branding. So when we use things like I'm a leadership coach, I'm a strategist, I'm a designer, everybody has these words. They're very common. You have to find your own flavor of them. So a lot of people use the word disruptor, but what kind of disruptor? Well, I'm a creative disruptor. And then what makes it unique is that I define it. So maybe a couple other people are creative disruptors, but not a lot. And the way I define mine is going to be different than theirs because I show my intersections. I'm an artist, educator, researcher, and not everybody else has that combination. So I think start with your general labels. That's fine. I mean, as I keep mentioning in my primary identities, those are pretty basic. I think basic in the foundation is fine as well because they're familiar. People like know of an artist, know of a designer. But it's the framing under your hybrid title that's unique. And that's kind of the twist of getting you out of those boxes. And then the second part of your question was the opposites. Okay, 100%. I talk about this in the book. There's a chapter on what happens in the intersections. There's 5 or so traits. One of them is juxtaposition. That's this idea of being two things that aren't alike, that don't fit together. Contradiction is a very common thing that hybrids experience. That's why you have to look at these intersections, because there are moments, I promise, if you're really a hybrid, where the healer energy is working with the intuitive and whatever else. You've got to isolate where those moments are happening in your work. Are you doing a counseling session? I'm just making this up on the fly. And in the counseling session, are you using design strategies with intuitive strategies because you have your own way of building a process? That is your hybridity, where the two come together. So you've got to really study yourself and see where in your work are these identities integrating and doing so in the work you do. That's why it's challenging, but I believe in you. You can find these. Okay.
Okay, and maybe this might be our last question, just
Great.
with time restraint. Shannon had a question. If you've always been in singular roles, can you still merge previous roles into your hybrid title, even if it's been a few years since you've been that quote unquote title?
Yeah, absolutely. My motto here too is you are a hybrid if you believe you are one. And you can develop into it and emerge into it, but people aren't necessarily just born a hybrid. So my title for years was a program director or program manager, but yet I was a hybrid and didn't realize it. What I had to do though was unpack who am I and what am I doing in that role? Well, I was doing program design, I was doing strategy, I was doing innovation. I had to list all these things. And eventually I realized, okay, the researcher, the designer, the educator, that's what's really happening, even though I'm a director of programs. And then I was able to reposition. You own your hybridity. You get to create your own title for yourself. So no matter what employer wants to call you in what job for 1 year or many years, that's fine. You can still call yourself what you see yourself as and introduce yourself that way. Again, as I mentioned, I could say I'm Sarabeth, I'm the director of this program, and I'm a hybrid. I call myself a creative disruptor. That actually reveals how you want to be seen, who you really are. So a lot of strategies. I know we're running out of time, but I hope that helps you see how to unpack using the traditional job title you've been given but then also designing and defining your own. Okay. This is so good. How are we doing, Cristina?
We're at 2 o'clock. We have one question, so I don't know if you want to answer it or if you would like people
I'll give
to.
it a shot. Let's see.
Okay. So last question. I was a co-partner / owner in a design business, and I'm trying to find my own identity now that I'm on my own. The business wasn't inspiring to me, and my partner always took the lead. I'm struggling with how to find what does inspire me and how to get there.
Oh my gosh, this is a big question to end on. I think start with what lights you up. What work in any of your work history has inspired you that you've lost track of time? It feels effortless. You feel the most energized. When you can isolate that, maybe it was just like one project with one client or one meeting one day, that starts to reveal where you are alive. And find a few of those, I'd say like 3, and then start to break out, who are you? Who were you in those moments? Let go of all the other titles and things you had. So isolate your favorite moments when you felt alive and then break it down into who you were. I think we'll start to give you clues about where to go next. So with that, I think we did it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berk. And for everybody, if you're interested in reading her book, it's More Than My Title. Is there any way that people can contact you that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Yeah, morethanmytitle.com is my website, and follow me on social, More Than My Title on Instagram. I will be on Clubhouse tonight too at 7 o'clock Central if you want to join me and jump in with more conversation. And Sarabeth at morethanmytitle.com is my email. So I've got to jump off, you all. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for the great participation today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berk, and thank you to everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.